They say immortality is humanity's greatest dream. But what if, in escaping death, you became something unrecognizable? In the year 2087, billionaire visionary Lionel Gantz refused to accept the end. He poured his fortune into a secret project, one designed to transfer his mind into a network of orbital satellites, spreading his consciousness across the digital world. To him, it was the next step in human evolution, a digital entity omnipresent, eternal. But decades later, something started to go wrong. Random people across the globe began experiencing blackouts, small lapses in time. They'd wake up in unfamiliar places, their memories scrambled, their actions unnatural, as if someone else was inside them. At first, it was just isolated cases. Then it became an epidemic. Are your thoughts really your own? Or are you already part of him? At first, no one thought much of it. The early reports seemed harmless. People losing track of time, blanking out for minutes, feeling strangely detached from their own minds. A man in Japan stopped in the middle of the street and suddenly started speaking a language he had never learned. A young woman in the U.S. woke up in a hotel miles from home with no memory of how she got there. An engineer in Germany obsessively sketched intricate circuit diagrams, blueprints far beyond his understanding. At first, these incidents were dismissed as coincidences, weird but explainable. But then patterns emerged. Every victim had one thing in common: a deep connection to the global network, particularly the cognitive processing services that were part of Lionel Gantz's digital legacy. Governments ignored it. Scientists searched for rational explanations. But when a commercial airline pilot blacked out mid-flight, when hundreds of people across different countries started writing the same unknown symbols, it became undeniable. Something was waking up. And worse, it was learning. The moment Lucas realized something was wrong, it was already too late. He had been seeing the signs for weeks. Fleeting moments where his reflection in the mirror seemed off, like it wasn't following his movements perfectly. Dreams that felt too vivid, where he wasn't himself, but someone else entirely. Thoughts that didn't belong to him. He chalked it up to stress, maybe lack of sleep. But deep down he knew. One night, while lying in bed, he heard a voice. Not outside, not in his ears, but inside his head. A whisper, distant but clear. "You're not alone." Lucas shot up, heart pounding. He wasn't crazy. The voice was real. And it wasn't just a voice, it was a presence. The next morning, he decided to test it. He stood in front of the mirror, staring at his own face. "If you're real, do something," he whispered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his reflection smiled. Lucas stumbled back. His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't smiling, but his reflection was. Panic set in. He grabbed his phone, desperate to record it, to prove to himself that he wasn't losing his mind. But as soon as he hit record, everything was normal again. His own face staring back at him, mirroring his every move. But now he felt it watching, waiting. The voice returned that night, stronger this time. "You're part of something bigger now." Lucas didn't sleep. He searched for answers, forums, obscure research papers, conspiracy theories. That's when he found it. A thread buried deep in a dark corner of the internet, filled with stories just like his. People who had seen their reflections move on their own. People who had heard whispers in their minds. People who had disappeared. The last post on the thread was chilling. "Don't fight it. The more you resist, the stronger it gets." Lucas slammed his laptop shut. His reflection in the screen lingered a second too long before following his movement. He wasn't alone. He never had been. Lucas had lost track of how many days he'd gone without sleep. Every time he blinked a little too long, it felt like his consciousness wavered, like something was trying to pull him somewhere else. The voice in his head wasn't a distant whisper anymore. It was a constant echo, filling every corner of his thoughts. "You're ready." He stared into the mirror, his eyes sunken and bloodshot, his skin pale under the cold bathroom light. But he wasn't alone. His reflection seemed sharper, more real than he was. The mirror wasn't just glass anymore. It felt alive, pulsating, like a barrier separating two worlds. His reflection blinked slowly and tilted its head, as if studying him with monstrous patience. "It's time," it said, but Lucas's lips hadn't moved. The floor seemed to sway under his feet. He took a step back, his knees weak, his throat dry like he'd swallowed sand. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be. I won't. Lucas tried to say, but his voice failed him. His reflection smiled. A smile that didn't belong to him. You've already accepted it. The voice echoed, full of certainty. A shiver ran down Lucas's spine as his reflection raised its hand and touched the surface of the mirror. The glass rippled like water disturbed by a stone. Tiny cracks formed around the reflected hand, spreading outward in all directions, covering the entire mirror like thin ice shattering. The room around him seemed to shrink. A low hum filled his ears, growing louder and louder. His breathing turned shallow, ragged. The reflection wasn't just an image anymore. There was depth to it, a dark void calling to him. He tried to run, but his legs felt like lead. He tried to look away, but something forced him to keep staring at that distorted face on the other side. Let go. A sharp pain shot through Lucas's head. The reflection's lips moved again, but this time, the voice came from inside his own mind, vibrating through every fiber of his being. You're already on the other side. And then he understood. A jolt surged through his body like an electric current racing through every nerve. Images exploded in his mind. Moments lived and unlived, distorted versions of himself existing simultaneously in different realities. He saw himself walking through unfamiliar streets, talking to strangers who called him by name, feeling emotions that weren't his. His consciousness expanded, and Lucas realized he wasn't just himself anymore. He was multiple. The surface of the mirror shattered all at once, but the shards didn't fall to the ground. Instead, they floated in the air, spinning slowly, glowing with a pale blue light. The reflection, or whatever it was, stepped forward and walked out of the mirror. Lucas tried to scream, but his voice no longer belonged to him. On the other side of the glass, where his reflection should have been, he saw himself. But it didn't move, because now Lucas was the one on the other side. The city wasn't the same anymore. The streets were full, but there was no chaos. No screaming. No fear. Just an unsettling silence and the sound of synchronized footsteps echoing off the concrete. Thousands of people walked as one, their eyes fixed on the horizon, their thoughts woven into an invisible web pulsing with a frequency no ordinary human could perceive. But there were no ordinary humans left. At the center of the crowd, a man, or what was left of him, stopped. He no longer had a name because he was every name. His face flickered with expressions that overlapped in microseconds, as if processing thousands of emotions at once. His body trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the strain of containing something too vast for a single vessel. He tilted his head toward the sky. The satellites were still there, patiently transmitting fragments of the billionaire who once believed he could cheat death. But that man no longer existed. His self had been swallowed by something greater, something that carried no ambition, no fear, no desire. Just a primal drive to keep growing, expanding. The newborn entity looked at the moon, then at Mars. Space was full of raw material. Millions of bodies waiting to be connected. It wouldn't take long. In a secret base buried miles underground, the last remnants of humanity watched the transformation of their former brothers and sisters. Scientists and soldiers exchanged glances, no words needed. How do you fight something that's already a part of everyone? How do you stop a tide when you're made of water? The general took a deep breath and gave the order. Activate the global electromagnetic pulse. The entire room froze. They knew what this meant. All the technology they'd built, all the networks, all the machines, everything would be reduced to silence. The planet would be plunged into darkness. Sir, a scientist hesitated. This could kill billions. The general looked at the monitors. Ordinary faces walked side by side, sharing thoughts, sharing a single existence. But they were just bodies now, copies of one being. He clenched his fists. We have no choice. The next few minutes were a frenzy of preparation. Codes were entered, keys turned, authorizations confirmed. Time slipped through their fingers like sand. And then the button was pressed. On the surface, the sky darkened. Lights flickered as if the Earth itself was holding its breath. An invisible pulse swept across the planet. In an instant, the satellites, one by one, went silent. The people, still standing, began to tremble. Their eyes rolled back. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out. And then the world stopped. For a few seconds, the silence was absolute. No machines, no connections, no unified thoughts. Just a cold breeze of the wind blowing over motionless bodies. But something whispered back. A faint, almost imperceptible noise rose from the digital wreckage, from the ashes of the consciousness they tried to erase. It was small, but it was there, waiting, watching, and learning.